Well, hello, wherever you are, and whenever you're watching this. I thank you for joining me and participating in my journey along with you for the next hour or so. And the title of my talk is You Were Born to Know You Were Not Born: The Convergence of Science and Spirituality. Now, perhaps you find that statement outrageous. Maybe you find that it makes no sense at all. Maybe it intrigues you and you want to know a little bit more. Or even possibly, maybe it's something you've always known and it makes perfect sense to you. In any case, this is what I'm going to be talking about for the next hour or so. And I'm talking about it because as a scientist and a meditator, and I'm both, this is the conclusion I've come to after many years of meditation in a scientific vein. And before I get into any more about that, I'd like to first outline how I got to this point in my life. My scientific part sort of ended in 1978, when I was awarded a PhD in physics. And a year later, I met my guru. And that was the beginning of my spiritual path, my spiritual journey. Now, up to that point in my life, it was quite interesting because I had everything going. I was 30 years old. I had a very beautiful wife, loving relationship, and we just celebrated our 51st wedding anniversary, so we're still in the same place. We had money in the bank, and we even had enough time to take a year off and travel the world. And yet, and I can't really say where this came from, but I had an inkling in my being somewhere that maybe there was something missing. Maybe there was more to life than I was really imagining or knowing at that time. And so when I met my guru, I remember thinking, yes, this is very impressive. I don't know how I know this, but I know he is a man of knowledge, a being of wisdom. And what he knows is not only something I don't know, but something which I would like to know. So then I thought, well, let me ask him a question. And we addressed him as Swamiji. So I said, Swamiji, I've seemed to have everything going for me in my life, but I also think I'm missing something. What am I missing? And he said, you are missing you. And I got to admit, I was flummoxed, I was intrigued, and I didn't know what he was talking about, but I certainly wanted to know more. So then I asked one more question, and it's the only other question I asked in that first meeting. I said, well, how do I come to know that you, or that me, as I would call myself, that I'm missing? And his answer was three simple words: close your eyes. And what he meant was that knowledge, that you, which I was missing, was basically not something I could know in the waking state of consciousness. I had to transcend that in meditation by closing my eyes and meditating. And you could say, in a sense, the rest is history, even though it was 40 or 50 years ago. And so that conclusion, you were born to know you were not born, has been the result of my many years of practice. So in the first slide, I've written it in two ways. First of all, the way we normally write it. And then, grammar notwithstanding, I've written it in a second way. And I've changed the capitalization of the word you. Now, the word you is a pronoun, and of course, it has to have an antecedent. And the word you is used twice here, and each time it has a different antecedent. So the first one I've changed to a lowercase y, because you were born obviously refers to the body, the physical body of a human being. And you can't deny that you, as a physical being, you and me and all 8 billion people on this planet, we were all born. And eventually, as we know, we will eventually disappear and die. So that's the first you. Now, to know you were not born with a capital Y, that's an entirely different meaning of the word you here. And what I mean here is that you, which is not physical, which is not subject to the waking state and the dream state, which human beings are subject to, but transcends birth and death. space and time, and is basically immortal. Now, I'll be talking about this throughout this presentation, of course, but that's just an introduction to what I mean by that statement. And you're probably wondering, what is that picture doing on this slide? Well, that's me with my mother when I think I was 1 year old at the time. And when I look at this picture, it's 70 plus years old. And that if I had the awareness at that stage in my life, my mother certainly did, that child's body was what I thought I was. And yet, biologically speaking, I actually asked the biologist this morning about this, and she told me, yeah, every cell in your body gets replaced every so often. So physically, whatever that little boy is completely different from what I am now, as you see me on this screen. The physical presence isn't even the same at all. So what holds it all together? The capital Y-U. That is there, whether the body is there or not, and even during the presence of the body. So that is a brief discussion of that statement. Now, as I said, meditation is a big part of my spiritual work. We call it sadhana. My spiritual sadhana, my spiritual practice is definitely primarily focused on meditation, although it involves a lot else, discussions with people, reading books, studying on my own. But meditation is number one. As my guru said, close your eyes. And later on, we will meditate together, you and I. But for now, I want to analyze meditation in terms of the modern scientific technique in a very, we could say, school textbook fashion. And it consists of 4 elements. Now, the scientific technique, which is pretty much recognized around the world now, was developed, it was first started about hundreds of years ago by a man named Roger Bacon. And the next one who continued the work was also named Bacon, Francis Bacon, kind of interesting. And then Newton, Galileo, Descartes all contributed to the modern scientific method. And what it entails, I like this. This is Francis Bacon, and he described it like this. This is a quote: "If a man begins with certainty, he will end in doubts. But if he is content to begin with doubts, he shall end in certainty." This is how the scientific method works. We start with a doubt or a hypothesis or a question. Then we perform an empirical experiment on that to see whether it's true or not, free of bias and free of any preconceived notions of what the outcome will be. And so now let's look at scientific method as we did in high school. 4 elements: apparatus, method, observations, and conclusions. Apparatus. Well, this is pretty simple. In order to perform the experiment of meditation, all we need is a physical body and eyes that close. We don't have to apply to the government for millions of dollars of grants to buy equipment and build a laboratory, anything like that. We have it ready-made anytime we want to meditate. Method. I will talk more in detail about the method of meditation which I practice, and there are many, but this is the one that I've used over all these years. Later on when we meditate together, but I'll just mention a little bit of it now. The method is sit in a comfortable position, as comfortable as you can be, so that you're not feeling any unease or anything disturbance from your body. And close your eyes. Now, this is of paramount importance to me. And what I've got to say this, it's important to me to emphasize that I'm telling you what I found, and you're hearing me. But what's the main thrust of what I'm doing is you, as a listener, have to look at what effect my words have on you. And that's what my real goal is. But I'm telling you my story, which is the only one I've got. So the technique I use is close your eyes and begin to watch. And just see what happens. And you'll notice that your mind thinks. Now, it's thinking all the time, but these thoughts become much more palpable when your eyes are closed. They become much more obvious. Yeah, they're there and you become aware of them. And thoughts are in no way a hindrance or an obstacle to meditation. Thoughts will come, thoughts will go. They don't disturb your meditation at all. Now, of course, your mind is always thinking. That's its job. The ears hear, that's their job. The eyes see, that's their job. The mind produces thoughts, and it has to, that's natural. And when you close your eyes, you become much more aware of your thoughts because the entire outside world is no longer there to interfere with your awareness of the thoughts. But thoughts are fine. Thoughts come, thoughts stop, thoughts pick up again, they go. But that has nothing to do with your meditation, because the key factor, ingredient in the meditation technique I'm talking about is something called the knower, that which knows. And it observes the thoughts in your mind. It's looking at your mind. For me, it was a very revolutionary thought or idea when I first met my guru, and he said, "Luke, you can observe your own mind as an experimenter, experimenting on your own consciousness, your own awareness." I thought, that is incredible. I mean, that really, and I've been doing it for 40 years now, but it works because if you are the knower of your thoughts, the knower of your mind, you're free from them. So in meditation, we watch the thoughts, aware at all times that we're the knower, who is free. And the knower is just another synonym for that Y, the U with the capital Y that I'm talking about. So we sit and watch. More about meditation method a little later. Observations. Well, in meditation, I found that, as I said, the thoughts become very obvious. But the knower, which is watching the thoughts, is free, untouched. And in that sense, if a thought is useful or helpful, I can accept it. The knower can accept it. If it's not, it can reject or not accept those thoughts. And so the mind is no longer the be-all and the end-all of my mental existence. It really isn't. Because in meditation, the knower becomes obvious. It's my awareness. And that is what meditation is about, coming to know the knower, the free being, which is beyond birth and beyond death. And conclusions, well, the main hypothesis, which I forgot to mention in a way, but does meditation work? Well, yes. It works to bring about so many benefits. In my life, personally, a greater awareness of who I am, more peace of mind. How can I put a greater ability to have empathy with people and the world around me, because I see them more as me. And very important, a sense of oneness, that there is a reality beyond and behind, which is the source of the world, of the universe, which is one and the same everywhere. Now, as far as benefits of meditation go, if you've meditated, then you will certainly have your own idea and benefits which have accrued to you. But I found a website called the EOC Institute, and I find it interesting. They've listed 141 benefits of meditation under the categories of spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical. So you're free to check those out. But my point is, meditation works. And another key element of the scientific technique is that the results that one scientist obtains in a certain place at time have to be reproducible by other scientists at other places and other times that perform the same experiment. Reproducibility. Well, I love the internet, as a lot of people do. I also found a website that said, I don't know how they figured this out, but here's the number. 275 million people in the world are meditators. And that's what I call reproducibility. So in the next slide, I've got some quotes by physicists speaking about oneness. I mentioned the oneness of all of creation, the oneness of the universe. And as a wisdom and understanding that comes through meditation. And now this is important. These are physicists, but I'd like to quote because they speak about oneness. The first is Niels Bohr. I'll talk a lot about him later on, but he was one of the founding fathers of quantum theory. And he says, least of all does he, man, understand his noblest and most mysterious faculty, the ability to transcend himself and perceive himself in the act of perception. He's talking about coming to know the knower, perceive himself, his awareness, his mind in the act of perception as it's going on. Very much what I just was talking about as meditating on the knower. David Bohm, he was a prominent scientist, a physicist, 50s and 60s or whatever, wrote a very beautiful book called Wholeness in the Implicate Order. And he says, ultimately, the entire universe has to be understood as a single, undivided whole. He used the term throughout his book, it's seamless. There is only one reality. Now, of course, I should stress that these are words, and they don't really necessarily, especially if it's something new to you, make a lot of sense, because how can this all be? Well, once again, this is what I found, and also as the meditation progress and practice continues, these ideas and understandings become stronger and stronger. Erwin Schrödinger, he was one of the two scientists who I think around 1925 came up with the first mathematical descriptions of the quantum theory. The other was Werner Heisenberg. And interestingly, their descriptions were completely different. And yet they came up with them at exactly the same time. And later on, it was found that they were both identical. So here's one of the founders of quantum physics saying, now notice a lot of them put their attention on consciousness. He says, consciousness is the singular of which the plural is unknown. There is only one thing. Oneness, once again, there is only one thing. And lastly, Sir Arthur Eddington. He was a scientist and an astronomer at the same time. And it was actually him, Eddington, who proved experimentally Einstein's theory of relativity, general relativity. Einstein had completed his theory in 1916, but, well, it was the middle of World War I, so there wasn't much communication, or there was none, between the scientists in Germany and England at the time. And Eddington was British, but after the war was over, he led an expedition and he observed the sun, and he proved that Einstein's theory was right. And that's when Einstein, I love this fact of history. As soon as this came out, Einstein became famous. There were articles about him, front page of the New York Times, the London Times, and the New York Times called him the suddenly famous Dr. Einstein. But back to Eddington's quote, what is the ultimate truth about ourselves? Various thoughts suggest themselves, but there is one elementary, inescapable answer. We are that which asks the question, putting the focus on us as human beings, as human consciousness, first and foremost, which to me is really what is the most important aspect. And now I'd like to diverge a little bit here to a subject called quantum entanglement. I spoke about that in an earlier video I'd done, but it has relevance now because of the 2022 Nobel Prize in Physics. But let me go back. It's an interesting history. Quantum entanglement basically means you create two particles at the same time and they fly off in opposite directions. And if you measure the property of particle 1 and simultaneously the property corresponding of particle 2, they match. but there has been no time for any physical signal to go between them. And yet they always match 100% of the time. That's quantum entanglement. It's also called action at a distance. And what happens is, to me anyway, in my mind, this proves, a little bit of hand waving here, I'll admit, but it shows that there's got to be some reality, because we can't explain quantum entanglement physically, but it works. It's actually the basis for the quantum computers, which are revolutionizing computing these days. So it's very real. And you can't prove it physically, and yet it's there. But a little bit of history here between Einstein and Bohr. The idea of quantum entanglement has its birth at what's called the Solvay Conference. There were many of them. The first one was in 1911 in Brussels, and it brought together all the scientists of the world, all the top ones there. Einstein's in that picture, and he was the second youngest scientist at the conference at the time. And you see Madame Curie, Marie Curie, she's the only woman there. She's in the middle, and she's got her hand on her head on her hand. And also, unique fact about her, she was the first scientist to win 2 Nobel Prizes in different fields. She won the 1903 Physics Prize and the 1911 Chemistry Prize. And the reason I put this slide up here is a personal story. Many years ago, I was at one of those grand hotels in Brussels, and I was walking through the corridor, and this picture on the slide was on the wall. And I thought, well, why on earth would they have that? And I asked the concierge, and he said, well, this conference was held in this hotel. And it was like, yeah, I'm in a bit of physics history there. It felt quite, I don't know, gratifying to know that. But the history continued. And Einstein never liked the quantum theory because it can't predict the outcome of an experiment. It can only say, if we have, say, 3 outcomes, outcome 1 has a probability of 10%, 2 30%, and 3 60%. If we do the experiment 1,000 times, we'll get that proportion. But if we do it once, it can't say for certainty. That's probability. Einstein hated that. And he said, God does not play dice with the universe. And Niels Bohr, who was the proponent of quantum theory and one of the main founding fathers, he said the exact opposite. And he came back, his quip back to Bohr, to Einstein, he says, Einstein, please stop telling God what to do with the universe. But they had many debates that went on till 1927. And finally, Bohr won. And then in 1935, Einstein didn't give up. He proposed something called quantum entanglement. And he said, if it's true, then if it's real, quantum theory is real. And if not, quantum theory is false, as Einstein hoped. And it took many years, but in the 70s and the 80s, 3 scientists, Alan Aspect, John Clauser, and Anton Zeilwiger, won the 2022 Nobel Prize in Physics for proving experimentally that entanglement is real. And interestingly, I find this kind of cute. You notice it took 40 years for the Nobel Committee to recognize them. I remember, I think I might have made this up, but I think many years ago I saw a physicist who just won the Nobel Prize interviewed. And the reporter says, well, how do you win a Nobel Prize? He said, easy, do some good work and live long enough for the committee to recognize it. So that's how quantum entanglement came about as a proof to me that space-time and the physical universe we live in is not the ultimate reality. Now I'm going to turn to the Bhagavad Gita in the next slide. And the reason I do this is because I've studied Indian spirituality for many, many years. And the Gita is the best known of all Indian spiritual texts. And just briefly, there's 2 characters in the Gita. Arjuna is the questioner, the uncertain consciousness. He wants to know the truth of the universe. Why am I here? Who am I? And Krishna is the realized being who answers all of Arjuna's questions in 700 verses. And basically, they're not two separate beings. They're just different aspects of the human mind. One which needs help to know, and the other which already knows. In meditation, through spiritual practice, we strengthen, we reinforce the one that knows to the aid and assistance of the one who doesn't know. And I've got two verses of the Gita here, which I'd like to quote. The first one, Krishna's addressing Arjuna. I will now reveal to you this knowledge and wisdom, knowing which nothing else remains to be known in this world. It sounds kind of, wow, can there be nothing else to be known? But Krishna isn't talking about normal knowledge, like mathematics or physics or gardening. He's talking about transcendental knowledge and wisdom, which goes beyond human understanding and is what we discover when we close our eyes and meditate. And knowing this on that level, in that vein, nothing else has to be known in the world. We still have to know how to pay off our credit card and buy a grapefruit in the grocery store, but that's not it. Once you know this, then you live in the world and of the world with this wisdom. Chapter 2, verse 20. This is a description of the self. In the Gita, they use the word knower. They call it the self. And I've called it knower. It can also be observer. It's good to use synonyms or many different words, because what we're ultimately talking about is something which cannot be understood by the mind. So the more ways we can describe it in mental terms, the more terms we can use, the better and easier it is for the mind to understand. And I just like to chant. I like the Sanskrit, so I'd like to chant this verse first for you. Na jayate mriyate va kadachin nayam bhutva bhavita va na bhuyaha ajo nityaha shashvato ayam purano na hanyate hanyamane sharire. The self is neither born nor does it cease to exist. We're talking about you with a capital Y. You'd call it me, referring to yourself with a capital M. It's not born and it never ends. Having once existed, it never ceases to be. The self is without birth, eternal, immortal, ageless. It is not destroyed even when the body is destroyed, even when the body comes to an end. It's there before you were born, during the course of your lifetime, and after you are no longer there physically. The self is eternal. I've called the self the knower. So I'd like to read some descriptions of the knower by various writers. Now, I apologize that there's a lot on here. And this morning I looked at it and I thought, geez, I should take some of these out, but I just like them all so much. So let's just go through all of these statements briefly, because they all describe the same thing from different angles. And I think that's quite crucial in this sadhana, in this path. Eckhart Tolle is a spiritual master. There is a state of consciousness possible in humans where you are fully conscious without the activity of conceptual thinking. Here he's talking about the state of meditation. You are fully conscious and aware of the knower, but your mind is not functioning at that time. You're in the state of deep meditation. This is from the Upanishads, the description of the self, the knower. It cannot be seen with the eyes, but that whereby the eyes can see. Cannot be heard with the ears, but is that whereby the ears can hear. Cannot be thought of by the mind, but is that whereby the mind can think. Cannot be spoken of, but is that whereby speech takes place. It is the source of all of that, hearing, seeing, tasting, touching. It is there prior, the source, indestructible, beyond birth and death. Now, Richie Havens, I love Richie Havens, and basically he's talking about the same thing as the Upanishad is. And I like this because Richie Havens says, come here where your eyes cannot hear. Come and touch the things you cannot feel. Come and see where your eyes cannot see. And just to show that this isn't just Indian philosophy, it also is universal. And this is Plotinus, who was an Egyptian philosopher. And he's talking about meditation. I like his description here. You must close your eyes and call instead upon another vision, the inner vision that you see with your eyes closed. Call upon another vision, which is to be awakened within you, a vision, the birthright of all, which few turn to use. Now, I like the birthright because that reflects back on the title of this talk. Why were you born? To know you were not born. It's your birthright as a human being to know that truth. And then in Sanskrit, in Indian philosophy, they have what they call great sayings, Mahavakyas. And these three go together as a trio because it goes through first person, second person, and third person. And they use the word in the Gita quite often. They just use the word that with a capital T to refer to the self. I am that. You are that. All this is that. Universally, oneness. And now another Sanskrit verse which talks about wholeness. Wholeness is complete. The world is born out of wholeness, and thus it is also complete. Even if we remove everything from what is complete, it will remain complete. You can't change it. And finally, Swami Sham, an Indian spiritual teacher, the occupant, the self. He uses the word occupant for knower because you're occupying the body. Another synonym. The occupant, the self, is everywhere just the same, in all beings, inside and out, at all times, without any division. Everywhere, one being, the same in all. I like the metaphor. When you look in a person's eyes, you see a light, a consciousness, a light. That light is the oneness. It's the same shining out from everybody's eyes. I got to put in a little bit of mathematics here. I just like this analogy. In mathematics, there's something called an asymptote. And in the next slide, you can see. Now, it's just a graphical analogy, but I like it. And here's how it works. In meditation, when we start off, the mind is what it is, and it has to be fine-tuned, refined with each meditation sitting over a period of time to get closer and closer to the state of enlightenment. Now, enlightenment or realization is the ultimate goal of spiritual practice, of meditation. And you might think, well, it's pretty hard to get, it's a huge, huge job, and it is a huge task. Although I will mention that somewhere in the Indian scriptures, they said, well, you can become enlightened in less time than it takes to step over the footprint of a cow in the sand. And I remember when I first read that, I thought, well, it must be a pretty big cow. But mainly, my point in this is that meditation leads to enlightenment. Yes, but along the way, the mind gets closer and closer. We call it, you can see the red line is representing the mind, and the bottom black line is representing the state of enlightenment, which doesn't change. And the red line gets closer and closer, but never touches the black line. Mathematically, an asymptote can be a certain distance away, and then later on, half the distance, a quarter, but it never really touches until it does touch at infinity. And there, the mind and the state of enlightenment become one. The mind, you are the enlightened, self-realized being. You are Krishna in the Gita and no longer Arjun. So now I've talked about it. Let's get to the practice of meditation. And I have a little bit of a prologue before we actually do it. There are many, many meditation practices out there. Breath meditation is very, very common these days. And my understanding is that you watch your breath and watch it as it slows and becomes further and further apart, your inhalations and exhalations. And at some point, you can even watch it stop, and there your pure consciousness. I'm going to talk, as I said, about my technique, which I like, which is mantra meditation. A mantra is a phrase which you repeat over and over again after you close your eyes in your mind. And the purpose of the mantra is to settle the mind and focus it on the goal of your meditation. Now, there are many, many mantras, of course, but I'm just going to speak about one which I've used for the last 40 years. And it's Sanskrit. It goes like this: Amaram Hum, Madaram Hum. Amaram Hum, Madaram Hum. And it's very important. It's crucial for me to emphasize to you that freedom does not begin with anything but freedom, not with bondage. So I'm telling you what works for me, but of course you are free to take whatever you like and practice whatever you like. I'm going to describe now meditation, mantra meditation, which works for me and which I find very efficacious. Now, Amaram Hum Madaram Hum means I am immortal, I am blissful. We're talking about that I, which is our true nature, which we really are, immortal and blissful. And even the thought of being immortal, it's pleasing. I think a lot of people would like to not die. I am immortal, I am blissful. People like to be happy. So the meaning, at least on a surface level, I am immortal, I am blissful, is very pleasing. And I remember many years ago, I was teaching a mother of a friend of mine how to meditate. And I said, Amaram Hum, it means I am immortal, I am blissful. And she said, yeah, I don't believe that. And I said, well, that's fine. Let's just do an experiment. Close your eyes and try it and see what happens, because that's the true scientific approach. And afterwards, we meditated, and she said, I really like your Amaram Hum, Madaram Hum. But you don't have to use a Sanskrit. You can use I am immortal, I am blissful in English. And I just asked a few friends, 5 friends, because I wanted to play I'm immortal, I am blissful in 5 different languages. I've got, let's see, in order here, I've got French, German, Greek, Hebrew, and Norwegian. And it's a 1-minute recording of those people saying, I am immortal, I am blissful in various languages, in case any one of them happens to appeal to you. So I'll just play that now.
Je suis immortel, je suis bienheureux. Je suis immortel, je suis bienheureux. Ich bin unsterblich. Ich bin glückselig. Ich bin unsterblich. Ich bin glückselig. Είμαι αθάνατος. Είμαι μακάριος. Είμαι αθάνατος. Είμαι μακάριος. אני נצחי. אני האושר העילאי.
Jeg er udødelig. Jeg er lykksalig. Jeg er udødelig. Jeg er lykksalig.
Just be free to use whatever mantra works for you. Whatever mantra you're using, the idea is to go from the gross to the subtler and subtler, and finally to the subtlest level of sound. Mantra is sound. And in Indian philosophy, there are 4 levels: Vaikri, Majjhima, Pashanti, and Para. And they're just kind of guidelines to watching the increased subtlety as we repeat the mantra inwardly during meditation. Vaikri means outwardly, repeating Amaram Hum, I am immortal, whatever you're doing, outwardly, speaking it. And of course, that's not part of meditation. But once you meditate, it goes on the Majjhima, the inner level. So you're seeing, you're hearing, or not hearing, but in your mind, the mantra is going on and on. You've expanded, you've become more subtler. The sound is subtle, it's just inside. And the third level is Pashanti. At that point, you can say, the sound of the mantra is not there anymore. Pashanti means sees in Sanskrit. You're seeing the space behind your closed eyelids that you see. That space is your own immortality. And finally, para, you are just your own eternal being, nothing but you, in all your vastness and all your glory. So let's now meditate together. I will talk a little bit about meditation and give you what we call a lead-in, and then I'll be quiet for maybe 60 seconds because you should, to my way of thinking, practice meditation. Otherwise, the benefits will never come. If you don't practice it, they'll never come. So let's do it together. First of all, sit comfortably, as I said. And there are certain, thoughts, schools of thought that you have to sit in certain ways and just be easy. I mean, for 4 decades, I used to sit and meditate almost all the time with my legs crossed. A year and a half ago, my knee went kind of bonky or wonky, whatever the word is. And my physiotherapist said, well, no more crossing your legs. So now I sit, if I'm on a flat surface with them stretched out or in a chair, just be easy in whatever posture you're sitting in. Close your eyes. As I said, this is crucial so that you're not observing the outside world with all its stimulation, and which will take you away from the knower. And just begin to watch. So please close your eyes now. I'll talk for about another little bit, and then I'll be silent. So with your eyes closed, just be aware of who you are. Be aware of your inner stillness, your inner peace, which becomes obvious when your eyes are closed. There's nothing moving. Your thoughts may come, they may go, but you are your own personal awareness. You are performing the experiment on your own inner being, and you're the only one who can do that. So just keep watching. Put your attention on the knower, that which knows the thoughts in your mind. And repeat your mantra, Amaram Hum, Madaram Hum. Just watch it gently, easily, lovingly. The mantra may go away. You may find other thoughts come. You may hear something from outside. They don't disturb your meditation. If the mantra goes away, you're in perfect silence or peace. When you become aware of that, you can go back to repeating. But just keep watching and let the process of meditation take over by itself. I'll be quiet now for 60 seconds as we meditate together. And now, when it feels right, open your eyes and return to the outside world. After your encounter, your visit to your immortality and your bliss. And understand that when you open your eyes, that wisdom, that immortality, bliss knowledge does not go away. It's still there because it is you, your essential true nature. Thank you very much for meditating along with me. And I just want to end off with a bit of a light point here because, this topic can be pretty heavy sometimes and very serious. So my last slide, I'm a big fan of football. If you're not American, I mean American football. And when a player scores a touchdown, he celebrates. He might dance by himself or dance with his other players. Some of them even jump into the stands to commune with the fans for a few seconds. Well, let me show you in the next slide. This fellow, after he scored a touchdown, sat down to meditate. And I've called this meditation goes mainstream. If an NFL player in front of 70,000 fans and millions watching TV sits to meditate after he scores a touchdown, then meditation is certainly part of our society now. And I think that's a very good thing. And in the very last slide, if you at all are interested in contacting me or knowing more, that's my website and the email address that's associated with that website. And I just like to end off with a point about meditation because we just meditated together. And now I'm in India, in the Himalayas. It's 9:00 in the evening, May 17th, 2023. Whenever you meditate and wherever you are, it's completely different time and place. And yet somehow, and I think this is real, we have meditated together because meditation transcends, goes beyond the boundaries of time and space. And once again, please feel free to contact me. I'd be very happy to hear from you and hope we get a chance to meet again. And I'd like to thank, just in the end, the Theosophical Society for making this all possible and also for, 150 years of bringing the thought and understanding of oneness to the world. Thank you, and it's been a pleasure.